Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for our first of many Inventure Leadership Conversations. These conversations for us are really an invitation to pause, to take a breath, and to create space for us to reflect, which we don't often do. The times in which we live, I think we all can agree, are intense, and to have a space where we can come together and share our observations, our thoughts, our perspective in terms of what we're noticing with leaders and teams and the world at large, I think is a really powerful and important space to create. So, with any conversation, I guess the invitation for us in this space is to open our thinking and actually surface better questions. That's really what we are looking at here. Not necessarily to come to you and to come into the space with answers, but to hold the intensity of sometimes not knowing, and in that process to invite deeper reflection. So this is a space which we will be having conversations with Hanlie and I, who I will introduce shortly, and also some thoughtful leaders in this space who can give their insight, their experience, and their perspective into these conversations as well. So this is around curiosity, questions, invitation, insight, and to explore observations and story, which is really important, I think, in today's context in the world. So, to join me in this space, I'm super chuffed to welcome Hanlie van Wyk, Dr. Hanlie van Wyk. And when I think about someone who I trust to walk alongside leaders in complex, high stakes environments, Hanlie is the person who comes to mind at the top of the list, first and foremost. And I think the reason for me is that she brings an incredibly rare blend of warmth, depth of wisdom, and incredible cultural insight. And that combination enables and helps teams to feel both seen and challenged to grow. And holding that balance is really where Hanley's strength comes to the fore. So I've seen Hanley help leaders in many ways shift from feeling completely overwhelmed and reactive, which is something I think we can all attest to leading with far more clarity, courage, perspective, and intention. As you will see through this conversation, Hanley really does hold a very grounded human way of working to turn incredibly big ideas and sometimes very abstract ideas around culture, inclusion, and behavior into practical habits. So the translation piece is where Hanley really does add values to teams. I think for me specifically, what stands out is how safe and stretching it is to be in the presence of Hanley. She listens deeply. She asks questions that others tend to avoid, including myself, which has been really helpful, and surfaces what needs to be said. And this is why I really believe she brings a deep wisdom into these spaces. So if you are listening and you are looking for a leadership coach to really help you unlock complexity, build more inclusive ways of leading, and unlock your best in people, Hanley is the place to go. And so, Hanley, it is with such joy that I welcome you to this first of many conversations that we're going to have around leadership. And so, thank you so much for being here.
Awesome, Julie. Thank you so much. And thank you for that very generous introduction and endorsement, which is exactly one of the things that I love about Julie is her generosity of spirit and the way that she approaches life and work. One of the other things that I've experienced around Julie is that she has a calm and a clarity that she brings to a room. I think there's an intuition that she has that really follows also her very compassionate way of looking at people and the world, and it allows her to create the kind of space where leaders can pause, reflect, and reset, especially when things are feeling uncertain and complex. So what stands out is that blend of psychological insight and that real business strategic savvy that she has, and she knows how to navigate between those two. Part of this, I'm sure, is because of her background as an organization psychologist, but I think as a human being, she is very comfortable being in these sensitive one-on-one conversations, as much as she is in a big strategic discussion, making it feel very natural and constructive. I believe that people are deeply trustful of Julie because of her incredible ability to listen, what I call through, like listen very deeply, like listen to what is said, what is not said, what is behind what is said, and able to challenge people with care around that. She also brings that clarity to things that when they feel tangled, because of her mix of rigor and empathy, creates these conditions for honesty, insight, and genuine progress, which is what she brings to leadership groups and groups in general. So working with her helps leaders or anyone think much more clearly, lead much more consciously, and it helps them unlock, I think, what is truly possible for themselves and their teams. So those are the things that I believe brings us to some of these discussions. And Julie, I'm very curious to hear from you. What do you reflect on, and when you reflect on that, and you reflect on that in the work context, what is happening with leaders and teams? Like what is standing out for you in this day and age?
Well, Hanlie, first and foremost, thank you so much for, equally your generous words, and I really do value and appreciate that. Around this question that you've asked, I think the main thing that I am observing across the work I'm doing in the coaching space, in the facilitation space, in many avenues around Inventure is that leaders and teams, and maybe broadly human beings, are utterly exhausted. I think there is an incredible exhaustion that is deep seated, and for many reasons, which I think, we all know what is happening in the world, what's going on for us, personally, in our family context, in our community. I think just being human and looking at what is happening broader in the world is taxing on our mental, emotional, and physical state of being. Now, with that in mind, if we take it into the organizational context, or in any context where we are required to lead, there is a very heavy load that leaders are carrying, and humans in general, but in this conversation, in the leadership context, I think it is significant. And the exhaustion that doesn't feel like it can be recovered from a good night's sleep, or a holiday, or time away with families. I think it does to a degree, but it's a deep-seated level of exhaustion. So that's the first thing. I think that we are dealing with that in many, many, many contexts and conversations. I think the second thing that I'm noticing is that we are so focused on giving people more and more content, more and more content and concepts. And we are filling an already overloaded mind-body system with more information. And then we are expecting leaders to shift their behavior. We're expecting people to become, in quotes, more effective by giving them more. And I think that the content heavy approaches are slowly starting to dissolve, and we are moving into a context, behavior shift driven environment, which does require a different approach, right? It requires a different way of working with people, a different understanding of what they are faced with, and meeting them at that intersection and that point. And I think because we also live currently in a low attention economy, giving people more is not shifting anything. It's taking that heavy load and it's just expanding it in many ways. So that's the second thing I'm noticing. The third thing, which we all know, is around what is happening in the context of technology and AI and the shifts in that space. And the reason why I bring this up is not to delve into it, but just to notice it, to note it, and I think we are questioning our relevance, we're questioning our impact, and that is changing and doing very different things to us psychologically. It's shifting how we behave, how we show up, how we are trying to prove our relevance in many ways. And that's quite interesting to observe and to in myself as well as in the people that I'm exposed to. And with that, the rising levels of complexity, intensity, ambiguity and uncertainty that we are all holding in the mix of this. So, probably the fourth thing, and then I'm going to wrap it up shortly, not to go down a rabbit hole. I can go down a rabbit holes. Um, is really around how I think we are dealing with the symptoms. I don't think we are dealing with root causes. I think what I'm observing is that the posture of our posture is not does not have the capacity to carry the load that we are being asked to carry at this time, and the weight is getting too heavy. And I think in many ways we're crumbling under the weight, and then we're dealing with just the surface stuff, and we're not actually getting into the essence of what needs to shift and change. And that is very different, because I think leaders are under enormous pressure around their behavior. We don't have to look far into the world to see that we are being watched, observed, judged, criticized, but in every moment. And that's a huge responsibility, and I think it's very necessary. But I also think in many ways it's very taxing. And I don't think our current leadership models are wrong. I think that they're just outdated, and we just need to match the demand of our time. And fundamentally, for me, that comes back to simplicity, and it just comes back to the basics, which I know we will get to. But those are some of the reflections that I've been noticing, especially recently in the last couple of few months. And I guess coming back to you and back to your points with that and what I've shared, what's the leadership reality that you're noticing?
Right. Certainly around the burnout, there has been many conversations around that. And some of the reports that I've been reading have noted that 65% of executives report that they feel that they are at risk of burnout because of that emotional exhaustion and also decision fatigue. Yeah. So it's definitely that's something that's in the reality of leaders today. I think compounding that, as you mentioned, also is this rate of change, right? There's always been change, and always there's this thing about it feels like things are changing so fast. But there was a report that I read from Accenture that says that the rate of change has actually increased by 183% in the last 4 years, and just keeps on going, right? So, and it's just not sustainable. So, and that is on top of this feeling of burnout and decision fatigue as well. So it doesn't show any signs of letting up or slowing down. And in the context of that, you can imagine that trying to now innovate or have an innovation mindset is virtually impossible. It's just biologically, almost impossible to do that, because that overload, that burnout, that tiredness doesn't allow for your mindset of innovation to be generated in that. And I think that's where a lot of organizations or leaders will find themselves struggling to try and come up with new ideas and new things. And that obviously will flow down past leadership to other people who are in their teams as well. And I think that might also lead to one of the other things. There's some issues around trust and psychological safety that I've noticed come up. And I think it's because some of this happens that as stress and burnout and overwhelm increases, sometimes what we do as human beings is we double down, right? or become maybe more command and control than we would maybe otherwise be. And that sometimes also impacts a lot of psychological safety, or lack of it for that matter. That also in turn will obviously bump up against innovation, right? Because if you're not feeling psychologically safe, there's no way you're going to be ready to bring ideas and fail at things and try things out, or certainly less likely. And then maybe even deeper rooted to that, what I've noticed is there is some issues around trust that seem to be heightened and coming up a lot more as well. It seems like executives seem to overestimate how much they are trusted by employees, but also it seems that less than half of leaders trust their direct managers, and only about a third trust their senior leadership to do what is right for the organization. So I think there's these different layers of things that I've noticed that are happening that are at interplay with each other very often, and quite serious, I think. And so I'm curious to hear, given the things that we have both like shared and discussed about what we've observed, how does Inventure Leadership approach this differently? Because I've often seen that this is happening, and as you mentioned, a lot of the ways that we tend to go at these things is now, I believe, like you, is outdated. And there's a very big difference with sitting in a boardroom discussing these things, or discussing with your team even, knowing about it, realizing it, but not knowing how behaviorally to begin to make those changes, or even practice those behaviors so that they become new habits. Because that takes a little bit more intentionality and time. And I think that very much where your approach comes in to address that shift.
Hanlie, one of the things that you've just mentioned is critical around the approach that we hold, which is around how do you shift behavior sustainably when you are exhausted. So when your capacity is compromised, when you don't have the space to find a new way to build a new habit, the cognitive load of that, which we all know is significant. When you'll know as the habit expert, but that takes a huge amount. And I think the approach that we hold with Inventure Leadership is that we need to go back to what is most simple. And so it's a modern approach. I mean, we use this term, but it's a modern approach to an ancient way of being, to a way of being in the world, which I think we have distanced ourselves from for a variety of reasons, but we've almost moved so far away from what we know to be true that it's very hard to access. So, and what I mean by that is that, when we actually start to bring leaders into different spaces, nature-based spaces, or different environments that shift us out of our default mode, something different starts to happen within our mind-body system. And so our approach is not just a cognitive approach. It's not just working cognitively with people on thinking and ideas and what can you do conceptually. It's actually coming back to what is most fundamental around the mind and the body system working as one, which it does, and which we have separated. And in many ways, what is different about the Inventure Leadership approach is that we are expanding our capacity to hold intensity. And so how do we do that? And it's not just around talking more and engaging more. I think there is a time and a place for that, but it's about deepened awareness and growth. It's about going deeper to access different parts of ourselves. I mean, that is essentially the essence of Inventure, an inner adventure, to go deeper to the places that we are not exploring, to the places that actually shift behavior. Because when we shift behavior, that in a way that it comes from a different place within us, not just a cognitive place, that is sustainable. And that leads to a different way of leading, of engaging with teams, of making decisions, of working with our own capacity, of holding complexity. We have to do that for ourselves first. Now, this is not an individual process. So I think it's important to just note that, is that we don't do this individually. It is an aspect of it, of course, but so much of it we need to do together, as teams, as communities, as organizations. We are built for that. And that is a critical aspect. And so what is different as well around our approach is that we focus on immersive experiences, we focus on creative expression, we focus on working, as I mentioned, with the mind and the body as one. We focus on taking people into different contexts and having sensory experiences that quietening the noise and coming back to what is most simple. And this might all sound wonderful, but scientifically and psychologically, what this is doing is that it is absolutely shifting how we relate and engage with the world, because we are working on it various dimensions. So we're working with the nervous system, we are working with our physical body and how it's feeling. We're tapping into our sensations, what's coming up for us. This is the work that I fundamentally believe that leaders need to do and need to be remembering. So coming back to our wisdom, our intuition, our discernment, and our knowing is what is going to help us navigate a world that none of us really have answers to. No leader can sit here with a level of certainty to say, I know, X, Y, and Z. We just can't. It's not possible. And how do we build our capacity to deal with the unknown? That is really the work that I believe that we need to do, and to do that together in the context of community, which takes vulnerability, which takes a different posture, a different level and capacity for presence. And when we do that collectively, I think we are able to consider different perspectives. We are able to do the deep work, and to feel a lightness in that. That is not, there's heaviness to it to a degree, but there's also a lot of lightness that comes with that. And I think, we're going to get into the 5 principles of Inventure that guide our work in future conversations. But to just mention them briefly, the 5 principles that guide our work as a differentiator is creating space. We need space. We need space to think, to be, to consider, and to remember. And we need to slow down. And that is often resisted against. Everyone's like, we need to go faster. And I think our view is that I think we need to take a breath and slow it down just for a moment and then respond. And then to actually remember beauty. I think we have forgotten that, and that speaks a lot to presence, and that's why it's really critical for us. And then simplicity, which I've spoken about, and the last one, which is probably the most important around building our capacity, is around joy. And it might feel a bit jarring, like, what do you mean joy? In the context of leadership. But that is something we will dive into. But that for me is our difference. It's the way in which we work, which is honoring to who we are. And I think that is critical for how we move through the world in a world that does not make sense anymore, and is requiring a different level of capacity from us and within us.
And it sounds like the kind of leader that will respond to this kind of approach would probably be someone who is really ready to try something very different, brave enough and courageous enough to say, okay, nothing wrong with the old stuff, but it's just not cutting it. So let's just re-engage in a very different way and push it out there a little bit. So we're looking for people who are ready to be ahead of the curve a little bit on this.
Yeah. And who, in many ways, Hanlie, just lastly, who can be with us to hold the questions that often bring up a lot of discomfort for us. And instead of rushing through them, if you are keen to actually sit with questions and to bring them to the table and to not need to have an answer right now, but to see what can come up when we hold the intensity of that discomfort, that really is in many ways the work that we do. So we would love to hear from you around what you are observing with your in your leadership context and with your teams, and if you're open to exploring that with us and diving a bit deeper and having these conversations, we would love to hear from you. So Hanlie, if there's anything else you would like to add, please do before we close off.
No, absolutely loved the conversation. Let's hear from some people.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, everyone. Cheers.
Cheers.